Hello, hello. Welcome to Whole Lotta Heart, where we talk about grief, healing, growing through the hard stuff, and learning to love ourselves through it all. I'm Kayla, your host, your hype girl, and your safe space. And whether you're deep in your feelings or just trying to keep it together, pull up a seat, child, because this space was made for hearts like yours. So, Whole Lotta Heart, this podcast as a whole has been talking about only grief from the loss of someone and what the process of healing from that is, and really the tender spaces that our hearts are from that process. That's really what have been the focus of our podcast so far. But today we're going to zoom out our focus a little bit and talk about how grief is not one size fits all, like at all. It's not always about losing a person, and it's not even always obvious to us, grief. And sometimes, I know this may sound strange, but it's true that you sometimes don't even realize that you're grieving until you're hit with that first moment. You're in the car crying over a song that used to be your song with someone that you lost or that you don't even talk to anymore. So in today's episode, we are going to talk about naming our grief. And I'm going to break down different types of grief because, yes, there are different types. And maybe you can identify with one of these because you've been carrying something heavy in a way that you just didn't have the language for yet. But once you do have the language, it changes everything. So if you're ready to feel a little more seen, a little less alone, and a whole lot validated, let's get into it. So let's talk about naming your grief and why this even matters. And when I say naming the grief, this is what I mean. I mean, putting words to what you're feeling or identifying the specific type of loss that you're experiencing, because grief can be heavy, it can be foggy, and it shows up in different ways in emotions like sadness, anger, numbness, but also in like physical exhaustion. And sometimes it helps to name exactly what's causing these feelings and why it's showing up. And here are a few ways that naming grief can look. So, for instance, you may say, I feel off lately. Yes, that is how you feel, but that's very vague and very ambiguous. So you can change that and say, I'm grieving the loss of my routine since my mom passed, and it's throwing me off a little bit. Or, I'm feeling anticipatory grief because I know my friend is moving away. And this is where you can get more specific and essentially pinpoint the reason you're feeling what you're feeling. But why does that even matter? Why does naming your grief matter? It matters because it gives it shape. Naming it gives it shape. And it goes from this vague feeling that you have to something that you can actually work with, that you can actually process and navigate. Naming the grief validates the experience. It says, okay, this is a grief. It's not just me being emotional. It's not just me being sensitive. I'm not crazy. This is actually grief and I'm experiencing this. Naming the grief helps you understand yourself. When you know that it's grief and it's not just stress and it's not just tiredness, you can meet yourself with a little bit more compassion and a little bit more grace during this grieving time. And it helps you honor it. And when you honor it, you really hold space for it and really reflect in it. And when you're reflecting in it, you can ask yourself questions like, what am I grieving right now? What loss have I been carrying without even realizing it? And am I allowing myself to actually feel what I'm feeling? Or am I trying to brush it off? And you might find that naming the grief is the first step to no longer feeling controlled by it. And it's one of the most healing things that you can do, naming your grief, calling it what it is. And it sort of makes me think about when like psychologists and doctors say the first step to getting help is acknowledging that you have a problem. Now, grief by no means is a problem. What I'm saying is being able to say, this is what I'm feeling, this is what's causing it, can help you process it and to figure out ways to successfully navigate it. So now that we've talked about naming the grief, let's talk about what we're actually grieving. okay? Let's set the stage. When most people hear the word grief, their mind immediately goes to funerals, black clothes, family and friends crowding around, tears, and all that jazz. And yes, that is grief. That is the beginning of grief. That's usually where the grieving journey starts. But it's not the only kind of grief. And so many of us go through so many things and different kinds of losses that are painful. But we tend to diminish the painful events that happen to us because we view them as not as traumatic or as painful as something else that could have happened. Or we compare our experiences with other people's. For instance, we'll think, well, she lost her mom. My situation isn't as bad. But having those thoughts invalidates our own feelings. And then it leads us to other thoughts like, well, why does this hurt so bad? It wasn't that deep, right? But no, it was. It is. For you, it was and it is. And I also want to emphasize that grief doesn't have to mean the death of a person. You can grieve so many things. It's about losing something that mattered to you. And if it mattered to you, if it shaped you, if it held meaning for you, if it was a safe space for you in some kind of way, then the loss of it is grief. Period. And you don't need anyone else to validate that. You don't need a dramatic story or to have a final goodbye to earn the right to mourn, whatever that is. And grief shows up anytime something you loved, expected, or counted on shifts or disappears. And that heartbreak is real, even if no one else sees it. Sometimes that contributes to how you feel because no one else sees it. Even if there's no funeral or no sympathy cards, no big moment of closure, that moment is real. So if you ever felt like, why am I still sad about that? Or I should be over this by now, I want you to stop right there. Because if it mattered to you, you are 100% allowed to grieve it. That's the rule. That's my rule, okay? So you can grieve a job that you loved that you lost, a pet that was more like family, a relationship that ended, even if you're the one who ended it, moving from a city or a home that felt like you, dreams that just didn't happen for whatever reason, or a version of yourself that just doesn't exist anymore. Grief is not just for funerals. It's not just about losing a person. It's for losing anything that mattered to you, whatever it is, a relationship, a job, a dream, a version of you. But if no one else is calling it grief, sometimes you tend to think you're being dramatic, right? Which, by the way, you're not. So when you name your grief and you call it out and you acknowledge it, you allow yourself permission and the space to feel it. And I think that's a beautiful spot to be in. Okay, so we're going to take a break really quick, my own little commercial break, if you will. But I just need to take a second to say that I'm really proud of this moment because we are on episode 7. Okay. And statistically, this is around the time where most podcasters will quietly disappear. They hit episode 5 or 6 and then life gets busy and they never come back to produce any more episodes. But not here. We are still going. Whole Lot of Heart is still pumping, still flowing, still full of life. And honestly, this is just the beginning. And I'm not saying this to brag whatsoever. I'm just saying this because this podcast has been such a labor of love for me, and getting to share my heart with you every week has become something really special for me, and it's something that I look forward to. So I want to thank you. Thank you for showing up and for listening and for sending me sweet messages and just letting me be a part of your healing, your day, your drive, your laundry sessions, all of it. Because I will say, even though we've made the accomplishment of getting to episode 7, I'm still on only episode 7. So I'm still new to this podcasting thing. I'm still finding my groove, still finding who I am as a podcaster. So I just thank you for your support so far. And just so you know, there's so much more in store for this podcast. I have ideas like new topics and just some other cute little surprises. So I'll just say, if you've been loving the episode so far, you're going to want to stay tuned, because the heart work that we're doing here and will continue to do, it's only going to get deeper and richer and even more real. So let's jump back into episode 7. All right. So now that we've talked about the importance of naming the grief and pinpointing what we're grieving, we've given it an identity, we've called it out. Let's get into the types of grief, because grief comes in lots of different flavors. It's not just, oh, someone died, now I'm sad. It's layered, it's complex, it shows up in all kinds of messy, unexpected ways. So let's break it down and put some names to what you might be feeling, even if you didn't realize that it was grief. So the first one is anticipatory grief, and this one's sneaky. It's the grief before the actual loss happens. Like when you know someone's sick, or you know a breakup is about to happen, or your dog is getting older, you're already grieving something you haven't even lost yet. And it messes with your head a little bit. And it's that stomach drop feeling every time the phone rings when your loved one's in the hospital. It's watching things slowly shift and trying to stay strong, but you feel like your heart is breaking anyway. It can feel like anxiety mixed with sadness, and it's sort of like a looming cloud over your head that you just can't get rid of. And I experienced this multiple times throughout my healing journey for multiple people. But the two that come in my mind that stick out the most is with my mom and with my granny, with my mom's mom. Now with my granny, we lost my granny in 2018. And I remember a few weeks before she passed, we were over her house. My mom put her to bed every night, and we were over there getting ready for her nighttime routine. And I remember she was laying on the couch, and I was sitting in the chair in her living room. And my granny was a tiny lady. She was very petite, but before she passed, she had gotten really frail. And, I was just looking at her, and she was just kind of laying there, watching the TV. She looked sort of lifeless. And I just started crying, because you spent your whole life seeing a person in one way. You see how they behave, you see the things that they do, and now they're at a point where they can't do anything without assistance. They have no energy. So it was sad for me, and I just began to cry, and I tried to hide it, but then I started sniffling, and she looked at me and she said, "Tita Pooh, why are you crying over there?" And I said, "Well, because you're sick and you really can't do anything and I feel bad." And she was just saying, "Granny's going to be fine. Like, I'm okay. I'm sick right now, but I'm getting better." But I knew that wasn't the case. I knew what was going on. So I could see ahead. Like, I was foreshadowing a little bit that we weren't going to have her much longer. And I was starting my grieving process then. And with my mom, the moment of anticipatory grief started after the doctor told us that she could go any day. Basically is what he said. He let us know that she was transitioning and it could really be any moment. That's when it started for me, because I didn't know when it was going to happen. But I know that it's going to happen. And it's crazy because people don't always talk about this one. But it can be just as heavy as the grief that comes after it, because it's ongoing even before it happens. And you're always on edge because you can see that it's coming, but you just have to wait it out. And in my case, it was like 10 days I had to wait it out after hearing those words from the doctor. So those 10 days dragged so long, because I was just waiting and I was just on edge all the time. So I definitely experienced anticipatory grief for different people at different parts of my journey. Then you have disenfranchised grief, aka the grief that society doesn't take seriously. It's the grief that isn't acknowledged by society, that They view the events that lead up to this as something you should not be affected by. You may be hit with things like, you lost your ex-boyfriend? Well, you weren't even together anymore. Why do you care? Oh, you had a miscarriage? Well, at least it was early. You weren't that far along. Your job laid you off? Well, that's okay. Something is better in store. No, no, and no. While these thoughts are true, and I understand that people hit you with these things as a means of encouragement and as an optimistic outlook on everything, but it doesn't take back or negate the experience that you had that led you to feel this way. And this kind of grief hurts, and it's real whether people get it or not. Just because people can't see or understand the depth of your connection doesn't mean that it's any less real. And sometimes the worst part is the silence. Like, you don't even feel like you're allowed to talk about it because you're hit with these things. So you don't, and then it just lives inside and it festers. Then there's the cumulative grief. And this is when life just keeps hitting you back to back to back. You lose a person, and then a friendship ends, and then you lose your job, and now you are spiraling. And it's that I can't take one more thing kind of grief. And you feel like you never got a chance to really breathe or catch your breath before the next wave hit, and it's exhausting. It is mentally, emotionally, and physically exhausting. And if you are here in cumulative grief right now, please treat yourself today. Hug yourself a little extra today, because this type of grief can make the process feel never ending, and it's overwhelming, and it's layer after layer after layer, and it's really heavy on the heart. And the heart does feel the full weight of it because it's back to back. It never has a chance to process. So be kind to yourself if you are in this cumulative grief. Then we have complicated or prolonged grief. Now this one's deep. It's when grief doesn't ease up. When you feel stuck, it may have been months or even years since the initial event, and it still feels like it happened yesterday. Maybe you feel guilty about how long it's taking. Maybe other people are moving on and you're like, well, what's wrong with me? There is absolutely nothing wrong with you. This just means that your grief is asking for a little more support. It needs a little bit more support, and that's okay. And this type of grief makes me think about the quote that comparison is the thief of joy. And not that you're necessarily joyful about being in the grieving process. That's not what I'm saying at all. But you cannot fully learn from your journey and fully be present in your healing if you're comparing your journeys, okay? Your journey is unique to you. It's not going to be the same as someone else's. It's not going to be the same as even your sister or your cousin or your mom. Even if you lost the same person, it's going to be unique to you. So do not compare your journeys. Your journey is unique and it's beautiful, and you're going to learn a lot through it. But just to backtrack a second, I would argue that everyone is in some sort of prolonged or complicated grief, because grief never goes away. It changes form, but it never goes away. And there's always those moments that take you back to the day that everything happened, where you can really feel like, geez, I thought I moved on from this. Now I feel like I'm back in that day or that year. Everyone has been there. Those triggers happen, and it puts you into that prolonged grief phase. Then we have the collective grief. And we've all felt this. And you want to know when we all felt this? During COVID, all right? Let's be real. We've also felt this during 9/11, okay? It's that heavy, helpless, worldwide grief that we all kind of absorb together. It's what we feel after tragedies, even if we didn't personally experience them or we weren't personally affected by them, but it still breaks our hearts. So I don't mean to be grim here, but school shootings, natural disasters, news that rattle you, It's a shared grief, and it does take a toll on you. Even if you're not directly impacted, your soul feels it because you're human at the end of the day. You have feelings. You can imagine what it could feel like to lose someone in the 9/11 plane crash. You can imagine what it feels like to be, the teacher of the children in the school shooting, to have to help navigate that. You can feel that. So it's something that we all have experienced in some way at some point. Then we have secondary grief or secondary losses. And this one cuts a little bit deep. There's this thing that no one really warns you about, that when you lose someone, it's not just the person that you're losing. It's everything they were tied to, the routines, the roles they played in your life, the little things that made you feel seen, safe, that made you feel grounded. Like, when my mom passed, I didn't just lose her. I lost my person, I'm having a bad day, let me call my mom real quick person. I lost family traditions. I lost the way holidays used to feel. Even just, what it felt like walking through the front door after work and mom is sitting there. And it was just like a relief. That feeling is gone. That is what we call secondary loss. And honestly, sometimes, they creep up on you months later and you're like, why am I crying in this Bath and Body Works sniffing this mahogany teakwood candle? Well, it's because it smells like home to me. Because it reminds me of something that I'm missing. Because, grief can be sneaky like that. And the secondary losses aren't always obvious initially, but they stack up. And just because they're not the main loss, obviously the main loss is the loss of the person or that main event. Just because they're not the main loss doesn't mean they don't deserve attention, and the feelings you feel from them are not valid. They matter too. Okay? Now let's talk about the kind of grief that's, I guess, a little harder to explain, and that's ambiguous grief. This is the grief that doesn't come with a funeral or a neat little timeline. It's the kind of grief you feel when someone's still here, but not in the way that they used to be. Like maybe your parent or grandparent has dementia and doesn't really remember who you are, or your sibling is struggling with addiction and they feel like a stranger to you. They don't feel like your sister or your brother. Or maybe you're grieving a friend who used to be your ride or die, right? And now you barely speak. It's like you're grieving the relationship, the connection. Or maybe you're grieving you, the version of you before the breakup, before the diagnoses, before the friendship ended, before life just flipped you upside down. And you can't explain it because technically nothing happened, but something definitely did happen. And let me just say, that's still grief. You don't need something as quote unquote official as a death certificate to validate what you're feeling. Closure from these type of grieving situations, ambiguous grief, might be messy or non-existent just because they're so ambiguous and, no one left or no one, passed. But your feelings are real. They may not have, passed in a sense, but they left your life. And you don't need permission to grieve something that's been lost, even if it is technically still there. Does that make sense? It makes sense to me. But, seriously, when I found out that there were actual types of grief, like names for these weird, heavy things that I had been feeling for different people at different times, I was like, hold up, this changes everything. It was like all the pieces clicked. And I remember thinking, wait, I wasn't just being emotional for no reason. I was grieving and I didn't even know what that was. So it made me start to think about how many of us are walking around with invisible grief that nobody sees. And because it doesn't fit into a neat little quote unquote somebody died box, no one checks in with us. Not even us. We don't even check in on ourselves because sometimes we don't even realize that we're in the grief. We just keep pushing through, thinking we're just tired or we're just off. Maybe we're just a little irritable or in a funk, when really our hearts are low key trying to process something huge. For me, learning the different kinds of grief gave me words, and having the words, game changer. Because once I could say, oh, I'm experiencing secondary grief right now, or oh, this is ambiguous grief, it gave me, it allowed me to stop being so hard on myself. It let me cry over things that I used to brush off. It helped me to stop gaslighting myself about my own feelings, and it made me realize just because something doesn't look like grief doesn't mean that it's not. And naming the grief, it didn't fix things. Don't get me wrong, I still have hard days, but it helped me understand what was actually happening in my mind, in my body, and in my heart. And most importantly, it helped me to show up for myself in a softer way. Because before I was like, oh, why am I like this? Why am I so emotional? Why am I crying? Why can't I control this? But now I'm like, okay, girl, we're grieving. Let's take a minute. What are you feeling? Let's feel it. And once you start to think like that, once you give your grief a name, you start holding it in a different light. You're holding it gently. You stop trying to shove it away, and you start to learn to live with it and even love yourself through it and love the journey of getting through it. And then naming the grief and understanding how it affected me helped me to give that same grace to other people, because now when I see someone being a little quote unquote off or extra quiet or even lashing out a little bit, I think, well, maybe they're grieving something too. And just like me, maybe they don't even know it. And it makes me think of the quote, be kind, because you never know what someone's going through. And that is so true. You never know what someone is dealing with, what could be setting them off, making them a little not like themselves. So keep in mind that you have had those days too. I always have that in the back of my mind because I know what it feels like to be in grief and no one knows about it. So be kind, give people grace just as you give yourself. So, did any of those types of grief hit home for you? Because if you found yourself nodding along like, yep, that's me, I've been there or I'm there, then I want you to know this. Your grief is valid, all of it. Even the quiet ones, the weird ones, the invisible ones. You don't need anything to justify what your heart is feeling. If you're feeling it, it's valid, and you have permission from me to feel it all. If this episode helped you put into words something you've been holding in, please share it. Send it to your people. Let someone else feel seen too. And come hang out with me over on Instagram at Whole Lotta Heart Podcast. I want to hear which type of grief you've been carrying where you are now, because I promise you're not the only one. So until next time, don't be so hard on yourself. Give yourself grace. Talk to you soon.